That douche would be me.
Welcome to another episode of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast, a nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. My name is Tyler Hunt, and I am here, actually in the flesh, with my co-host, as always, Pat Attack. What's up, dude?
Not a whole lot, guy.
Is that a thing now, as you call people guy?
I don't know. I've literally never called anyone guy ever. And I was just like, why did I say that? And of course you did let it go, per usual.
Well, you were calling me bud last weekend whenever we were at Indie PopCon. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, we are buds. But then you, like, after a week, like, we're down to the more informal guy.
All right. So before we jump into this particular episode. So we've been talking about doing something, for a little bit. So, we've done our Rotten Tomatoes film draft for a couple of years now. And the first year I lost at the game that I literally made up myself. And then the second year, this past year, Tyler lost. And to fulfill his bet, he did, while we were at Indie PopCon, post to the subreddit Roast Me. And got some pretty good responses. Wasn't quite the turnout that I thought it was going to be. It's kind of a weird subreddit where they like kind of gatekeep a little bit. The moderators are a little bit more rigid than I've seen in other subreddits, but I guess that makes sense because you're literally just making fun of people the whole time. So it kind of makes sense in that sense. But he did get some responses, and so I wanted to I'm going to have him read some of his favorites.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on like mean tweets or something, but a lot of these things got pretty aggressive pretty quick about the podcast. So would you like me to leave those off? Or would you like me to say those? Because I would plan to just say them.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't care.
Okay, so the first douche that commented said, what was the bet that you couldn't satisfy your wife?
That douche would be me.
So I guess I should set it up. So I posted a picture of myself from Indie PopCon. Part of our banner was in the background, so that's how people, that's what the basis for some of this. And then I said I lost a bet on my podcast, roast me, whatever. And so Pat commented, what's the best you could satisfy your wife? Somebody tagged on to Pat's and said, no, the bet was that he would be able to satisfy his son, which is good stuff. This guy said, 4 comments after 8 hours. Your podcast must be huge, in all caps. Oh, and thanks for making sure the banner behind you is readable. The only thing more pathetic than your shameless attempt to get publicity through this sub is your dick face in life. Put that in your podcast, dipshit, which we just did. So
that shit got real.
Yeah, like I said, stuff started to get pretty aggressive. So trying to get free publicity for your shitty podcast, which yes, I was the bet that you could make your head not look like the tip of a penis. That was a good one.
That's my favorite.
I bet you can't fix your receding hairline, which I read that to my wife and her sister the other night. And they said I don't have a receding hairline, but it is what it is. What was the bet that you'd get more than 3 downloads? Having a college radio spot at 2 a.m. isn't a podcast. There was really no need to mention or show pictures of your podcast, like the times you show your dick. There's just no interest in what comes with it. You look like you're invisible to women. No one wants to watch a podcast about a homeless guy sponging free Wi-Fi on a stolen iPad. Stop asking for donations and get a real job, you bum. So, I don't know about that. Nobody gives a fuck about your lame podcast. Dick nose, which I wanted to include that one because I'm assuming he says my nose looks like a dick, which I do have a big nose. So, you look like, I like this one. So, you look like Tom Felton with fetal alcohol syndrome. That one was pretty good. Lindsey Graham's emotionally disturbed sister. More gums than Double Bubble. Oh wait, no, that's the Dick Knows one. Hard to tell if you're a lesbian going for Ellen DeGeneres or you just had a sex change. Either way, you've got the perfect face for radio, which is funny because a guy came up to our booth and said that to us last week as well.
To your face.
Yeah. He was socially awkward, I think. I don't know. I don't know what he was going for there. And then I'm pretty sure that's a lie, but I can't sit through enough of your podcast to check. So again, a lot of stuff around the podcast, which wasn't necessarily my intention there, but yeah, that's my roast.
Yeah, I feel like I also lost in that a little bit.
Like none of those people actually like looked up our podcast, but that's what I started to get a little paranoid about it. Like, what if they riot because they know the name of our podcast and like downvote us on iTunes or something? So that made me a little nervous.
You've obviously don't go on Reddit very often. They do not do any research.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, that's the whole point of the subreddit. So, yeah, it's funny because when you post to it, they said they give you the suicide crisis line. So, I wish I don't know, if I was suicidal, like, I wouldn't set myself up for that, right?
No, I mean, obviously, when you go on there, you kind of have to have a sense of humor about yourself, and that was kind of the point. I go on there every once in a while. I don't post to it very often. I've never posted my picture to it, but I do occasionally post to it, and it's kind of fun. Usually, it's the caption that does it. Like, you kind of, I think the funniest ones are the ones that do it from the caption. Like, they'll obviously pick something about your facial feature or whatever, and then they'll do something with the caption, which I always think is funny. That's usually the route that I go, and that's why I said the thing about the bet. So I think those are really funny. Some of them obviously cut a little deep, got kind of aggressive about the podcast, so I feel like I kind of lost a little bit in that as well. But the Tom Felton one is definitely the funniest.
Yeah, that one's good. I should have put that I'd lost a bet. I shouldn't have put I lost a bet on a podcast. Maybe that would have deterred them from the podcast roasts a little bit. But I gotta tell you, like, it's weird. Usually when you get notifications on social media, you're like, oh, like, you perk up a little bit. Like, oh, so who sent me something on Facebook or who followed me on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. Like, that was a whole different feeling. Like, to get the emails like, you have 5 new comments on your Reddit post. It's like, oh no, I don't want to look.
Yeah, so I got the notification. I only got one notification. It was because of the guy that piggybacked off of my joke, and his joke wasn't even funny. Like, I read it and I was like, come on, dude. Like, come on. All right, let's just jump right into the first segment of the podcast. If this is your first episode, welcome to the podcast, Redditors, mostly. I assume that everyone else this is their first episode, they're just coming from the subreddit. We start off with just kind of checking in with each other. We call it what we're into. So what are you into this week?
So I'm going to talk about a movie that we went and saw last weekend for your birthday. So Saturday of PopCon weekend. I know that it's kind of a tradition for you. You try to go see a movie on your birthday, and we held up that tradition this year, and we went and saw Hereditary with Matt Hurt from The Obsessive Viewer. If you follow us on our social media platforms, you probably saw Pat's collage of pictures in front of movie standees, which was taken right before we saw Hereditary. So that should give you a little bit of context to the movie going experience. But yeah, this movie, there's a lot to talk about, and then there's not, because I don't want to spoil it for anybody that hasn't seen it. And I think some of the surprises that are in the movie are what makes it really good. But I did want to obviously bring it up because it's like blowing people away. It has a 93 or 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it just fell on a weekend where if we didn't have any PopCon, we most likely probably would have reviewed it, or Ocean's 8. But given the Rotten Tomatoes scores, probably Hereditary. So we talked about it quite a bit after we got out of the movie theater, and we talked about it the next day at PopCon, just you and I, and we kind of solicited some thoughts from Matt Hurt as well, and the consensus was pretty much that we all liked it. You'll have to let me know what your thoughts on it are now, because it seemed like you were the most sour of the three of us. I saw on Matt's letterbox that he gave it a 4.5, and I would give it a 4. So I'm curious to see where you would rate it, and I'll throw it over to you in a second to do that. But if you're not following along at home, Hereditary is a horror movie that is put out by, what studio put that out? A4?
It's A24.
A24 Studios, the same studio that put out The Witch, which caused some confusion with us because we thought the same person who made The Witch made Hereditary, but that's not the case. It's about a family that is grieving the loss of their grandmother and mother, and just kind of how things spiral out of control from there. If you've seen the trailers for this movie, I was under the impression from the trailers that it was a haunted house movie, and it is not. I mean, there's a couple moments that you could maybe say were haunted house-esque, but it's definitely a lot deeper than that. So it kind of follows the family spiraling out of control after the death of their matriarch. I don't want to get too much into story because there are a lot of plot points and a lot of things that happen throughout it that really add to the shock value of the movie. So I don't really want to get into that, but obviously this not being a haunted house movie turned into something a lot different from what I was expecting. And I mean that in a good way. Like, it was very surprising sitting there watching the movie with what happens on screen. I think that the horror was very well done. There is maybe one instance that could be classified as a jump scare, and even that's really not that bad. But if you ask Matt Hurt from The Obsessive Viewer, who about jumped out of his seat when that happened, it was maybe a little bit worse for him. But this isn't like a slasher movie. There's not a bunch of things popping out. Like, it's very much a movie where it lets you sit in the moment and kind of just feel a little tense and a little awkward. And the horror isn't over the top, but it's just good enough to make you uncomfortable, which is what I really appreciated. I think it's really easy to make a movie where jump scares happen every 5 minutes. So to make an over 2 hour long film where you just kind of, again, sit in this feeling for long periods of time, like it was very, very well done. So I was very happy with that. Performance wise, I thought the performances were pretty amazing. Like Toni Collette, especially, I think this is probably her best performance that I can think of. Like, she's great in Little Miss Sunshine, but this movie, she plays an emotional wreck really well. And there's some like standout scenes where she kind of like bears her soul to her family that she was very effective in and makes you feel, again, very uncomfortable. So I think that a lot of what worked about this movie can be attributed to her. The supporting cast was great as well. And like I said, there's just a lot of twists and turns that are really effective. So again, I don't want to be too specific because I do not want to spoil anything. But if you're a horror fan, you should go support a movie like this, because that means we would get more movies like it, which is what we need right now in the horror genre. I will say it's weird. The cinema score of this movie is like a D+, which is user rated. So it seems like a lot of moviegoers out there aren't liking this movie as much as I did, which I think is strange. Maybe they were expecting something else. Maybe they were expecting a jump scare haunted house movie, but everything about this movie clicked for me. So like I said before, if you're interested in what I would give it, it's a 4 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, so you mentioned the confusion over The Witch, and obviously it's the same production company, so that makes sense. And then I guess it was one of the producers. It shared the producer, which would make sense because it's coming from the same studio. So it also, for me, kind of felt like if you told me the same guy made that movie, then it would make sense to me have watched both movies, because it just had that same feel to it. Both of the movies were. And I actually liked Hereditary a lot more than I liked The Witch. I don't think I'll ever watch The Witch again, even though I can't appreciate it for how well it was put together and the atmosphere and all that good stuff. It wasn't quite enough, especially that third act didn't quite pay off the way I wanted it to. But it definitely, Hereditary and The Witch definitely feel tonally the same. Like, as far as they're built with atmosphere and tension and performances versus just jump scares, like you said. And I definitely appreciate that. One thing that I will say about this movie, and it might kind of, I don't know exactly, explain is the best word, but kind of the reason I think the cinema score might not be as high as you would expect, considering the Rotten Tomatoes percentage, is the fact that it is a very, very slow burn for, I would say, at least an hour and 20 minutes of the 2 hour plus movie. It really, really builds everything really well. But as movie buffs and movie nerds that we are, I think that, and I'm trying to find the words because I don't want to come off like a douchebag, like, oh, this is high art and if you don't like it, you don't understand it or anything like that. But like, I feel like the three of us, we obviously watch a lot of movies and we watch a lot of horror movies, and there's a lot of garbage. And so when you have to sit through a lot of garbage, it's nice to have a movie like this that does it in a way that the performances are great. The score was great. I've talked about this a lot in past episodes. Like, I love when horror like uses sound really well. And that's one of the reasons why I love A Quiet Place so much, is because there's not a ton of sound in that movie, but it really matters in that movie. And I really appreciate how it matters in this movie as well. The score, the sound, the performances, everything builds really well. And there's not jump scares. And one thing that I mentioned to you, I think the next day, cause it was kind of hard, to talk about this movie right after we saw it, is I liked the idea, cause there's one moment in the movie, and I won't ruin it, but basically, you expect, like, not necessarily a jump scare, but you see the monster, I'll just say, in the corner of the room. And you just, in most movies, you would get like, oh, it's like charges at the person. And you don't get that. Like, they just sit in that moment. And as horror fans, like, I think for me, that's the creepiest part. When you're just waiting for that thing that you think is going to happen. And that is the worst part of those movies, is just the tension and the awkwardness. And when it happens, it gives you that release. When you don't get that release, you're just uncomfortable the whole movie. And that's how I kind of felt almost this entire movie. It just makes you uncomfortable. And I think that's fantastic. Like, that's a horror movie for me, because they don't give you a ton of monsters. There's not a ghost. There's not jump scares. So you don't ever get that release. You're just very uncomfortable for most of this film. The thing that I didn't particularly like, and the thing, it's going to sound really silly because it's over a 2 hour long movie, and it's like the last 30 seconds or a minute of this movie, is they give you a lot of like mythology at the very end. Like, literally the movie ends immediately after they give it to you. And I'm just like, why did you need that? You don't need that in the movie. Like, you could have literally ended the movie a minute or 30 seconds before that, and I would have been totally fine. Even if they did that little fucking tongue click thing at the very end and then cut out. Like, yeah, I would have kind of rolled my eyes a little bit, but it still would have been better than the ending that we got. And it's just kind of hard for me to think about this movie and not think of that, because that's the last thing that you see. But other than that, it's a fantastic movie. And I will just say that it is a slow burn again. So if you go into this movie expecting a ton of scares, especially at the beginning, you're going to be a little bit disappointed.
Yeah, that's something I should have brought up, because that's something that I kind of was saying after we got out of the movie last weekend. Was my issue with it was that it was a very slow burn, and I didn't see myself watching this movie again. And I will say that I've kind of changed my tune on that. Like, I think that this is a movie that I will watch for Shocktober this year, but this is a once every 2 year movie to me, just because it is a long film, and it's like you said, just a very slow build up to kind of the shit that goes crazy towards the end. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there. What would you say out of 5?
I wanna lean towards 4, but I think ultimately I'll give it a 3.5, because as much as I do appreciate everything that I said, like, leading up to it, even though I love movies like that, even for me, it was slightly too slow of a burn.
Yeah, it was nowhere. Like, if you go back and listen to our review of The Witch, I don't think I was very kind to that movie. I don't remember where you landed with it, but I was no way would I put this in that category. Like, it's a slow burn like The Witch is, but I feel like it pays off enough during this 2 hour runtime that it's worth it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Cool. What are you into, man?
All right. So I am into a video game that if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you should, it is awesome. The nerds you're looking for, you know that I've been playing for a little bit now, and that is Detroit Become Human, which is an PlayStation 4 exclusive game. And normally when I'm playing a game on the YouTube channel, obviously I do commentary for it. So I try not to talk about it on the podcast because I know some of you do subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. So I feel like because I'm doing the commentary on the videos and then I talk about it on the podcast, it's like I'm double dipping and it's a rehash for a lot of you that watch the videos. But for this particular walkthrough, I think it's all right because I'm actually not doing commentary for the game. It's just literally, you don't even see me. It's just somebody playing the game. Well, I assure you, of course, it's me playing the game, but I just felt with this particular game that it was appropriate to do that. So if you're not aware, like I said, Detroit Become Human is a PlayStation 4 exclusive. That's kind of like a Telltale game, where it's very story based. It's heavy with a narrative and there's not a ton of gameplay. I think this is actually a little bit better than maybe a Telltale game, but it's not quite as bad as maybe like the Planet of the Apes, The Last Frontier game, where that is just literally a movie and you get to make some dialogue choices and that's about it. This is definitely more towards the Telltale type of game, where there is a lot of long dialogue, but you do get to move your character around. You do get to make choices, and there are some action sequences where you kind of have to do the button mashing sequences and stuff like that. And in this game versus maybe Telltale, it feels like those moments actually matter a little bit more in this game. Like they'll even tell you at the very beginning when you start the game, like as far as choosing difficulty, like if you're not a hardcore gamer, maybe you should choose a easier difficulty, because if you fuck something up, you lose characters and they don't come back. So there was actually a moment in the game, early in the game, I think it was in the second or maybe even first episode, where I thought a character just died because I fucked something up. Spoiler alert. Well, just watch the video. Anyways, so I probably should explain what this game is about before I kind of give my thoughts about it. It's a futuristic game. It is based obviously in futuristic Detroit, where there are androids who essentially do, if you've ever seen Conquest for the Planet of the Apes, they basically do that type of, like, they're just essentially just housekeepers and they run errands for people and stuff like that. And some of them have a problem with their software, and they essentially kind of become conscious. And so they call them deviants. And essentially you play 3 different characters. One, you're actually an android that works with the police department that tries to catch deviants, who essentially works with them to investigate crimes committed by androids. The other 2 are just androids that become deviant. And essentially at one point you are literally you're playing as a character trying to catch another character that you're also playing in or playing as. And essentially the way that the game is mapped out is you just play these chapters, and each chapter obviously it switches back and forth between the 3 different characters. And what I really like about this game is, one thing that I've really liked in gaming, and it really kind of started, I guess, with Knights of the Old Republic it wasn't the first game, because I think I actually played Fable first, but then I played Knights of the Old Republic, those types of games where character choices actually mattered. Like, obviously you do things in video games and it matters, but you're always going to end up at the same place. And with Fable and Knights of the Old Republic, it literally felt like it had actual consequences, what you did in that game versus how it was going to end. Like if you killed somebody in Fable in a town and you waited long enough, the guards wouldn't arrest you, but the town would be scared of you for the rest of the time that you played the game, because they remembered, oh, you're the guy that murdered somebody. And what I really like about this particular game and some of these types of games is that matters. Like some of the character choices that you make in this game matter, which is obviously important because it doesn't, like, there's not a ton of actual gameplay. So if your character choices don't matter, then obviously what do you even have? Like, what are you even playing for? And what I really like is, like, when you finish a chapter, it will give you like the map, like how you got to it won't tell you what other choices, like if you didn't make a choice, if you didn't unlock something, then it won't show you what it is, but you'll kind of get to see that there's this whole branch that you didn't get to explore. And so it makes me interested to maybe possibly go back and replay this game eventually. I say that for, I think, every game that I play. And then of course my backlog just gets bigger and bigger. So I don't end up going back and playing or replaying these games, but, it's definitely interesting. I will say that the graphics look amazing. Like it feels like you're playing a movie, and it's fantastic. There's a character who is played by an actor, named Jesse Williams, which I know him from because he's a guest occasionally on one of the fantasy football podcasts, that I listen to, but he's actually kind of a famous actor. He's in Grey's Anatomy, and it looks exactly like Jesse Williams. Like, it blows me away how close it is to him. And, I can't think of his name, but I want to say he's Bishop in Alien. Oh no, that's a different guy. He's in Alien, but I can't remember what character he plays. He actually is a character in this game as well. And so that's pretty cool. I will say, and I've said this a little bit when we talked about kind of like mocap and stuff like that. The facial animation on this game, as far as like the lips moving and stuff like that, doesn't quite line up. But other than that, I think that's more of a, like, the technology just isn't quite there yet. Cause you see that even in these $1 million or $100 million movies, you see that they still can't get it. Like, DC can't even cut out a fucking mustache. So I just don't think that we're there yet with the facial animation. So I can't really, like, negatively affect my review of the game, too much because of that. Cause that's really the only thing as far as graphically that I can really kind of downgrade this at all, like criticize this game at all. I haven't quite finished it yet. I think I'm about a little more than halfway through, but I'm really digging this game, and I would definitely suggest it if it's anybody that's out there that's listening that really enjoys these types of games.
How many hours of gameplay is it?
I want to say I looked on how long to beat, and I think it was like 11 hours, something around there.
Yeah, my buddies and I had an interesting conversation around like how many hours it would be for it to be worth it to buy a game. One of my friends is really into RPGs and thinks that it should be something that you pour tons and tons of hours to. Obviously, games like this that are really campaign driven that can be beaten 10 to 15 hours, I think are worth it if the campaign is good. And it sounds like the campaign's really good in this game. So I just think that's a little interesting, like what certain people value. I would say 11 hours is a little light for like a $60 game, but it sounds like you're enjoying it.
Yeah, that would be my only concern too, is that it is a little light, for a game that literally was $60. But like Planet of the Apes, I think was like 3 hours, but that was like $10 or something like that when I bought it. And I played a game similar to this, What Remains of Edith Finch, which I think was like 3 hours as well, but that was fairly cheap too. So I do appreciate when games do come out like this that do take that in consideration when they price the game. But this was a pretty big title for the PlayStation. So, it doesn't surprise me that it came out full price.
Gotcha.
All right, so our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tal and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two. So what'd you read this week?
So I read a number one this week, mostly because, for those keeping track at home, I'm in Evansville this weekend, so don't have all of my comics with me, so it's kind of hard to pick up a comic at the comic book store and jump into a number 4 if I haven't read number 3, so on and so forth. So I read a comic and picked up a comic that I wasn't anticipating reading, which is The Magic Order number 1. It is put out by Image and written by Mark Miller and drawn by Oliver Coipel. So I'm assuming that it's Mark Miller. I started calling him Mark Millar because Kevin Smith started calling him Mark Millar on the Fat Man on Batman podcast. But at this point, I think it's Miller and it's just spelled with an A. So I'm going to roll with that. But they're really leaning into the Netflix acquisition of Miller World, especially with this comic. This is labeled as Netflix's first comic, which is kind of strange to me. The back cover of the comic is just the Netflix logo. So I was a little caught off guard with that, especially since it's put out by Image. So I'm not quite sure how that works, but here we are. This is a miniseries, and it's the first of 6 issue. Seeing is that's the same as what Reborn was. Reborn was a miniseries that was 6 issues as well. It seems like Miller is kind of in a stage in his career where he's more about creating content at this point, which makes sense from the Netflix point of view. Obviously, they want as much IP as they can get out of this Miller World acquisition, and he is delivering as far as I'm concerned. This comic in particular is described by Miller himself as Harry Potter meets The Sopranos, and it definitely feels that way. Basically, the premise is that there is a magic order made up of 5 families that protects us from monsters and other dark forces. There are magicians, sorcerers, wizards, etc., and now there's someone that is picking each of them off one by one, and these families are forced to find out who it is to put a stop to it. So overall, I think this is a pretty cool concept for a comic, and I'm pretty interested in it after the first issue. So I am glad that I picked it up after deciding that I wasn't going to read it. It doesn't give a ton of exposition in this first issue, which, you know, Pat and I constantly say in issue 1s, we really appreciate it when they let you kind of figure things out on your own instead of forcing it down your throat. And with this being a 6-issue miniseries, is, you know, if they had spent 1/6 of the story just telling us what's going on, it probably wouldn't have made for a very good story arc. So I'm glad that they avoided that. Some of this first issue did get a bit confusing because it jumped from character to character and family to family without explaining who was who. But Miller obviously is a genius storyteller, and this promises to be an interesting miniseries. The only issue I kind of see with this, and the only issue that really crossed my mind as I was reading this, was that it kind of touches on what I was saying at the beginning. Miller World was bought by Netflix, excluding things like Kick-Ass and Kingsman because other studios have already bought the rights to those and movies have already been made. And I can't imagine that there's a ton of IP left. So now Miller has to start building this universe, and between this and Reborn, I think that he's off to a really good start. But if you're just going to be a content machine, I think that could cause a decline in quality pretty quickly. So I'm kind of curious to see how his writing evolves over the next few years. I'm sure that this will be a Netflix movie or a Netflix TV show at some point. Same with Reborn. So stay tuned for that. But overall, you know, it's hard to fault it because it's pretty good quality. So I'm gonna finish out this miniseries for sure, and I'm excited to see where this story goes.
So I think it's interesting that you brought up the whole Netflix deal, which it sounds like they're kind of beating it over your head with the whole back cover and everything. But it's interesting because you brought that up, because I had a similar feeling and I guess experience with one of my former favorite writers, which was Seth Grahame-Smith, who writes novels. He wrote Pride and Prejudice and Zombies and an Unholy Night and several other, I mean, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Like, he's wrote several books, and he's kind of pulled back from writing a lot of books because I think he got into movies for a while and they haven't really necessarily worked out that well. But it's interesting because, and I bring him up because Unholy Night, I knew that had already been optioned for a movie already. Like, he had already sold the rights and everything. I don't know where it is in production. It's obviously not coming out anytime soon because I haven't heard anything about it. But as I was reading it, that kept creeping into my mind. Like, this feels like something that was written to be a movie. And I could be completely off base there, but I wonder if that's going to start happening with his writing and with his creating. Is like, oh, I got to get shit out so I can make it into a Netflix show or whatever. Because that's how those books started to feel for me, was that he's writing to make this a movie.
Yeah, and that was, not only was that thought in the back of my mind the whole time I read it, but then there was an afterword by Mark Miller, And like the first paragraph is about, hey, this is the first comic that's come out since the Netflix acquisition, and I'm going to keep doing this and yada, yada, yada. So like you said, it definitely beats it over your head. And right now it's not so worrisome. Like the art's amazing, but I could see like at a certain point that it's like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a TV show and I'm not interested. So hopefully it doesn't come to that, but chances are it will.
For sure.
What'd you read?
All right, so I also read a number one. That is Thor number one. So we've talked a lot about Thor recently. I know Tyler read A Mighty Thor, which was Jane Foster. I, being all that is man, I decided to choose to go with Unworthy Thor, which is still Thor Odin's son. So that was a weird joke that I tried to degrade your masculinity there, and it just didn't work at all.
Yeah, man, you got to be careful in this climate, like talking down on women superheroes and stuff. You can't do that.
Yeah, it was misguided for sure. And it just wasn't a funny joke. But anyways, so Thor number one is, of course, going back to what we say. It feels like every other episode, it feels like we're talking about a new number one, like a new Black Panther, a new Captain America, something. It seems like obviously comics have a way of rebooting things, and it was only a matter of time before Thor got his hammer back and he became Thor, and Jane Foster kind of fell to the wayside a little bit. And that time has come. He has not gotten his official hammer yet. He does have his axe. He does have several other hammers, but they're not the hammer. And this book is kind of interesting. One thing that I really liked about Unworthy Thor, unfortunately I didn't stay with the book, so I can't comment on whether or not that continued, is it just felt like that particular character, Thor, always kind of felt to me like he was kind of like the Superman of Marvel. Like, why would you fuck with that guy? There's not a whole lot you can do to him. Like, he's literally a god of thunder. Like, he's super strong. He can fly. He can shoot lightning bolts. Like, why would you fuck with that guy? So he was never a very interesting character to me. But with Unworthy Thor, they took away his hammer and he became a very vulnerable character. He didn't quite know what to do with himself. And that type of character is much more interesting and feels much more like a Marvel character. And so I was definitely interested in that book. Unfortunately, not interested enough to keep up with it after, I think I read 5 or 6 issues of it, and then I kind of cut it out of my reading list. But I did enjoy what I read. So I wouldn't quite say that Thor number one is quite up there for me as far as Unworthy Thor. They definitely took some of that interesting character aspect away from him. He's not quite the vulnerable character that he was in there. He does have his axe. Like I said, he doesn't quite have his hammer back yet, but we're getting there. I do like the fact that essentially all of Odin's treasures have been stolen and kind of scattered. So he's kind of going on this weird treasure hunt. So that kind of leads to a few interesting moments in this comic. I know I said that I was going to start writing down who drew it and who wrote it, but I forgot to do that this week. So I apologize for that. I should have been a little bit more prepared. The reason I bring that up is because the artwork was a little bit different than I would expect from a mainstream book like Thor. It just wasn't I wouldn't say it's abstract by any means, but it definitely wasn't super realistic. It wasn't true to form or anything like that. They definitely had a little bit of fun with it. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it was my taste, but I appreciate that they try to do something that was a little bit different, that wasn't completely cookie cutter, that type of artwork. So I appreciate that, even though I wasn't crazy about the style. I appreciated that they tried to do something different. All in all, this is a pretty mediocre book. I would say that it has a few interesting moments, and the artwork, like I said, is interesting, not necessarily my taste. So if you're a fan of the character, I definitely would suggest it, because I don't think you'll be disappointed. I think that people that have been with this character for a while might appreciate some of the Thor mythology stuff that's in this book, kind of reminded me a little bit, not quite as dark and gloomy as Thor Dark World was, but that movie has a lot of Thor mythology in it, and so it kind of reminded me, this book kind of reminded me of that movie, and at least in that aspect. So if you are a huge fan of the character, I definitely think you would appreciate this book a tiny bit more than I did.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Jane Foster's Thor stuck around as long as it did. Like, I want to say I talked about Mighty Thor for the first time, a year or two into us doing the podcast, which we're coming up on our 5-year anniversary. So that's quite a while that she was Thor. And I obviously love that character and love that incarnation of Thor because, like you said, Thor is kind of like this, I mean, he's not kind of like, he is a god, and it's kind of like the Superman syndrome. It's like, how do you beat him? And with Jane Foster, there was this human element because her regular form was withering and she had cancer. So I really dug that, obviously. So I'm glad that she stuck around as long as she did. But you're right. At some point, they got to bring back Thor Odinson. So that time has come. It sounds like I wish they would have done a better job. Like, I'm not interested in reading anymore, but yeah, I guess it was time for the character to be back. So it is what it is.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I would always love to give credit to Marvel. I think they did a good job. I don't agree with a lot of stuff that they do as far as like rebooting and we're going to have this big event and it's going to do this or that. You get tired of hearing that over and over again. But I did appreciate, like you mentioned, that because when it happened, everybody was like, oh, okay, whatever. He's going to come back. And yeah, we all knew he was going to come back, but they held out longer than I thought they were going to.
For sure, man. You ready for nerd news?
For sure.
All right. So quite a few stories have come out since the last time we did nerd news, because obviously last week for our Indie PopCon episode, we didn't really talk about any of the nerd news headlines. So I just kind of pulled out a few instead of making this segment really long. So the first that I wanted to talk about happened when we were at Indie PopCon, and that was that there was a new Halloween trailer released. So obviously Halloween is on both of our radars. We're both big fans of the franchise, big fans of horror, like you just heard us talk about in Hereditary. So I wanted to get your take on the trailer. For me, I thought that it was pretty awesome. It has a really good feel to it. I have some mixed emotions about them ignoring all of the sequels, because I think some of the sequels were fun and added mythology to Michael Myers. And obviously this is ignoring Halloween 2 as well, which was done by John Carpenter and I think should be canon, because in this trailer, it says that Laurie Strode is not Michael's sister, and I'm pretty sure that was established in Halloween 2. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that was an interesting take on it. But at a certain point with a franchise that's this old that you're trying to reinvent, I get it. I'm definitely excited to see this movie. I'm excited for not only, of course, Jamie Lee Curtis, but Judy Greer. I like Judy Greer a lot, and she plays her daughter, which I think is pitch perfect. And hopefully this is a really great movie for Shocktober this year. I definitely have my fingers crossed.
Yeah, I was actually pretty surprised at how much I liked this trailer. I, unlike you, liked the fact that they just kind of did away with it. We're just going to pretend like these movies didn't happen, because that's what studios do anyways all the time. So you might as well just get it out of the way in the trailer. I do kind of like they did kind of poke fun a little bit. I felt like they poked fun at the Rob Zombie, because he definitely goes into that mythology a lot in his movies. And so I thought that it was kind of funny that they were kind of going out, and it felt like kind of like a jab, like, hey, that's stupid. So I did appreciate that. And it looks cool. I like Jamie Lee Curtis as this fucking badass. She's not helpless like she kind of is in the first movie. She fights back obviously in the first movie, but I just like the fact that she's been training all this time and she's become this super like grandma badass or something like that. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, it should be interesting, man. I'm definitely looking forward to it as well. Let's see, this next story. So we talked about the Miller World universe at Netflix. So the properties that are not part of that, it sounds like Matthew Vaughn is trying to spin into his own universe. He's making a Marv universe, which is his production company, which is going to include Kingsman and Kick-Ass. So they're going to do another Kick-Ass, probably what the storyline that they're doing now in the comics, where it's a single African American mother that's kind of donned the mask. So they'll probably do that. They're also talking about a Hit Girl movie still, and doing not only a sequel to Kingsman, but a prequel to Kingsman and a spin-off for The Statesman. So don't get me wrong. Like, I love these movies. I love the Kingsman movies. The second one is really cheesy, but, you know, there were definitely fun moments to it. I think as much as I love Matthew Vaughn, he's getting a little ahead of himself here with this plan. I don't know that audiences are going to be interested in a bunch of Kingsman movies. I mean, we'll see. But yeah, I think that this is just kind of another person buying into the universe concept, and that it's not going to necessarily work for these properties.
Oh yeah, for sure. If it doesn't fit, like, trying to force it in it never works. So I don't know. I don't think I liked the second Kingsman. I know for a fact because I was pretty sour when we reviewed it. Like, I haven't seen it since. Like, I don't really have any desire to see it. I just wasn't into that movie. I had almost the opposite reaction to the second one than I did the first one. It's like the first one I didn't have any expectations whatsoever, and then it completely surprised me and blew me away, and it's a really fun movie. And then the second one just felt like it fell into every trap of a sequel, and it just wasn't fun, and I had really high expectations. So I don't know. I mean, if they make more Kingsman movies, I will go see them, so I guess I'm part of the problem. But yeah, this is definitely one of those dark universe things where they just want to force a universe on us without actually putting in the work or really thinking it through.
Yeah, and I like Matthew Vaughn a lot, and I like his stuff. So I kind of wish that he was putting his creative forces into something else, but I will say that there's a glimmer of hope there because he has a good track record, in my opinion. So we'll see. I got one more story, and then I'm going to throw it over to you for E3, because obviously that was a big deal this week. So the last story just came out today, and I remember you talked about this show at one point for what we're into, and I'm assuming you don't watch it anymore, but for any Lucifer fans out there, it was canceled on Fox, but today it was revealed that Netflix is picking it up for a season 4. So Lucifer will continue.
Yeah, I actually almost posted something about this on our Facebook, so I'm glad that I waited to see if you included it in Nerd News. Yeah, I watched, I think, the first half of the first season, and it wasn't for me because it felt like they just wanted to make a cop show that just happened to have this character in it. And it wasn't interesting. Like, they didn't let Lucifer be Lucifer, and I don't know if that eventually happened later on, but I mean, I'm not going to wait a whole season to see the potential of a show that, I mean, it just was any other cop show, and that just isn't interesting to me at all.
Yeah, I know that it definitely has its legion of fans out there, and that's what helped it to get picked up, but I'm not interested either. So it will be on Netflix, though, for all you nerds out there that like it. So that being said, I followed E3 a little bit this year, but Pat follows it a lot more closely than I do. So I am going to throw it over to you for anything that sticks out from E3.
I'm just going to move the microphone closer to me because I'm going to be talking for a while. There was a lot from this E3. It was the same weekend as PopCon, so I actually missed the first couple of days, which was kind of a bummer. I will say overall, as the show's concerned, it was pretty unremarkable. I mean, there was a lot of games, but we didn't get a ton of gameplay, and some of the especially the third-party companies really just didn't bring it this year. We had a really good show last year, and with video games, it kind of makes sense because they do take so long to make. Like, when you announce a video game, oh yeah, we're making this new game, if it's the first announcement that we hear, it's probably, unless it's like a super small indie game, it's probably 2 or 3 years at least away. So, and we're also kind of in a weird space right now where it's like, if they talk about making a brand new game, it's like, is it going to be at the tail end of this console generation, or is it going to be next generation? So it's definitely it led to kind of a very uneven E3. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through because everybody had a presentation. All the big companies had a presentation. I won't obviously spend too much time on each one of them. E3 was one of the more shitty presentations as far as I was concerned. They did show a lot about Anthem, which is their new big multiplayer game. It kind of looks like a Destiny clone to me, like just the way that it's built and the graphics and stuff like that. So I'm not too excited about that game. I mean, you do have jetpacks and you do have a lot of customization in that game, so it could be cool, but like I said, it just kind of looks like a Destiny clone to me. They did show a little from Madden 19. It's hard to get super excited, even though I will get that game for a game that we know we're getting and we get every year. So that was kind of weird that they even showed it. They did show one of their independent companies that is technically EA, did announce Unravel 2, which is a game that I was really excited for because they announced the first one a couple of E3s ago, and the game got released, and I played the first like 3 or 4 levels, and it just gets super repetitive, and I never even finished it. I said I was going to go back. It's another one of those games. I said eventually I'll go back and beat this game, and I just never did. And so I've heard some really good things about Unravel 2, because what was cool about this announcement was they actually announced it and was like, oh, by the way, you can get it right now. So that was kind of cool. I've heard some really good things. It actually can do some co-op, so that's pretty cool. Square Enix was the worst. Like if it wasn't for Square Enix, E3 or not E3, EA would have been the worst. But Square Enix was really, really bad. It was kind of weird because I read somewhere that Microsoft and I guess PlayStation also does this. They'll pay the publishers, like the studios, to be the ones that show the game. So a lot of stuff, because Square Enix's presentation was actually after Microsoft, and so it felt like, oh, most of the stuff that they showed, they had already showed at Microsoft's presentation. So it was like, I think I tweeted this out, something to the effect that Square Enix's presentation was like the kid in class that just read the back of the book and did the whole book report. Like it was really shitty, and just like they didn't know what the fuck they were doing and they had nothing. I will say that Shadow of the Tomb Raider looks pretty cool. That was a big thing, but we had already seen a little bit of that from Microsoft. Ubisoft, which was one of the first ones that I really, really watched because I was at Indie PopCon. They had some really cool moments. Assassin's Creed Odyssey looks amazing and might be the first Assassin's Creed game that I play from start to finish. I played the first couple of games, but I never finished them. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. I'm actually going to be playing that on the YouTube channel here in a little bit when it comes out. Skull and Bones looks amazing. It looks like a Sea of Thieves, so like grown-ups. Like Sea of Thieves, obviously just the art style looks kind of cartoony, and this looks like more of a hardcore pirate game. And there's a lot more customization, it looks like, than Sea of Thieves. So I'm definitely excited about that. Unfortunately, we didn't get a release date on that one, so I was kind of bummed about that. They made a huge deal about this game called Starlink Battle for Atlas, and it really looked just like a really mediocre, shitty, just boring game. And then all of a sudden at the very end, they were like, oh, by the way, if you buy it on the Switch, you can also play as Star Fox. And everybody lost their fucking mind. And I was like, for a shitty game, like you didn't give a shit about 10 minutes ago. So I thought that was kind of lame. I was kind of excited, even though I've never played the first game. Beyond Good or Evil 2 is collabing with Hit Record. So the hyphen, my boy, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is actually helping making that game, and he helped with the presentation. So I thought that was pretty cool. Don't really care about the game, but I just thought I had to bring that up. They did give some details regarding Division 2, but I didn't really like the first game, so I didn't really care about that. I am taking way too much time on this. I just realized that we're going real long. So I'll go a little bit quicker. Bethesda, I think I might be one of the only gamers that doesn't get a nerd boner anytime that they bring out a new game. I don't know. Some of their IPs I just don't care that much about. And honestly, their show wasn't great. It could have been a lot better, but they just kind of teased a bunch of stuff. They did show a lot of Fallout 76, which I'm kind of nervous about, just because I don't know how that game is going to work with like the online experience. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. Microsoft, they had way too many games. Like it felt like they were just like showing you like little snippets of everything. I read somewhere that they showed like 50 games during their presentation, which is just too much. It's a ridiculous amount of games. So I'll just name a couple. Division 2, Devil May Cry 5, for Horizon 4, They did a lot of first party games as well. They kind of emphasized the first party stuff. So they talked about a couple of different Gears of War games, and then of course the game that I really wanted them to announce, and they did. They didn't give a release date, so my guess is it's probably going to be the next generation. Is Halo Infinite, which I'm super excited about, obviously. Moving on to Sony's, I'll make this one real short because I actually did a video on our YouTube channel, so I'll just send you over there to check that one out. But I will say that it was by far my favorite presentation of all of them. They showed the most gameplay. A lot of the games that they talked about are games that are going to be coming out soon, or they have already shown at previous E3. So it made sense that they kind of showed extended looks at some of these games. It was kind of really the only presentation where you got to see really extended looks of things other than maybe Nintendo and Super Smash Brothers. So speaking of Nintendo, essentially most of their presentation was just 45 minutes talking about Super Smash Brothers, which doesn't really necessarily disappoint me because Nintendo does things a little bit differently. They have what they call Nintendo Directs, like several throughout the year. So E3 is not that big of a deal for them because they just talked about Pokemon Let's Go a few weeks ago, and they just had, I can't remember their last Nintendo Direct, but it wasn't too long ago. And I think they're already planning another one in August. So they do several every few months. So it wasn't that big of a deal. They basically just told everybody, hey, by the way, we're going to probably talk a lot about Super Smash Brothers. And they really, really did. They went into an insane amount of detail about this game. And so that was kind of cool, especially if you're a fan of that particular IP. I will say that I was a little excited that they finally announced that Fortnite was coming to Switch. So it's just another way to play Fortnite. So I think that's pretty cool. But other than that, pretty lukewarm on this year's E3, even though I just talked about it for 25 fucking minutes. I will say that last year's event was amazing. And like I said, the cycle for video games, it takes so long to make things that you just knew that we weren't going to get an amazing presentation 2 years in a row.
Yeah, so now I'm going to go through and give my opinion on all of that.
Good luck.
Not really. Yeah, I mean, I followed it pretty closely. There's definitely some stuff I'm excited for. And spoiler alert, our nerd favorite this week is going to be what your favorite thing out of E3 was. So I will save it for that.
All right, cool, man. So our next segment, I think we were cutting it close to being, I think a couple episodes ago, we mentioned like, oh, this is the longest we've ever gone before we got to our main topic. This might be the second longest. We're almost to our hour and we haven't even started reviewing it. We are going to be reviewing Incredibles 2, which of course is the new Pixar movie. And it was written and directed by Brad Bird, who did the first one. He also did Iron Giant and Tomorrowland, among others. Of course, it's a sequel to the first film, and it picks up where the last one left off. Elastigirl is picked instead of Mr. Incredible to spearhead a campaign to get supers made illegal again, and their family must adjust accordingly. So we've talked about this a couple of times on the podcast, and Tyler's kind of busted my balls about it. I'm not a huge fan of the first one. I talked about this before, that I'd really only ever seen it once. My wife and I, when we first started dating, would kind of do this thing because we're both big movie buffs. So like we'd be chit-chatting and we'd be like, oh, you haven't seen this movie? Next time we have a date or hang out, I'm coming over and I'm bringing this movie and we're watching it. We kind of do that, for the first like 6 months to a year that we date. Like every other date would just be her coming over and us watching a couple of movies. And I think actually, this is kind of embarrassing, but one of my movies was the Rob Zombie Halloween movie that we kind of picked on a little bit earlier. So, she's not big on horror movies. So I wanted to show her that one. But, yeah, so I think I'd only watched it that one time and I really just never connected with it. And it's one of my less favorite, I guess, Pixar movies. And I think I might have said this to you guys when we were sitting in Hereditary. I think this is the most apathetic I've seen, or I have been, for a Pixar movie. But then I was thinking about it later after I said that. I was like, that's not true. It's Cars 3 for sure. But I just wasn't thinking about that at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, on my end, I obviously am a huge Disney Pixar fan, like we talk about in almost every episode. Incredibles is no exception. I love The Incredibles. I have on my Letterboxd all the Pixar movies ranked, and I can't remember where exactly The Incredibles falls, but it's towards the top of the list. And for me, it's like it came out whenever I was working at the movie theater. I would go in there on my breaks and my lunch and just watch it. And I remember watching it when it came out at the movie theater. So it just always kind of stuck in my mind as a big deal for me as far as Pixar is concerned. I mean, when it came out, a lot of people called it their favorite superhero movie because it was before a lot of those types of movies came out. It came out in 2004, 2005. So, we're at the point where just Batman Begins was getting ready to come out, let alone the Marvel Cinematic Universe hadn't even taken off yet. So, it kind of set a precedent there. And I love that first film. So obviously for Incredibles 2, I was very excited. If you go back and listen to some of our past episodes, whenever they announced this movie, I talked about how I was disappointed that it picked up directly where The Incredibles left off. I was hoping that they would do a time jump and we'd get to see the family as they were older and maybe some of the different things that they would wrestle with. But, at the end of the day, we'll get into it in the review. I think that the decision they made was fine. But, I obviously was excited for Incredibles 2.
All right, so I have a feeling that we're probably going to disagree on this one, but let's just jump right in. We break down our reviews like we do with the episode as a whole. We break it down into segments, and we like to just kind of start off with a general overview. We call it broad strokes. So how'd you feel about Incredibles 2?
Overall, I thought that it was really well done. I mean, it's hard to go see an animated movie anymore and say that it's not beautiful, but this movie in particular, the animation was just crazy. The certain things with water and other elements that really, really looked great. I think Brad Bird is, for the most part, a really great director. I don't think that you or I either liked Tomorrowland. So Tomorrowland's not great, but, his Mission Impossible movie's good. Of course, Incredibles, Iron Giant. So I think that he tells a really good story here. Again, I wish that it would have picked up with the family when they were older. I think that there was just this emotional connection missing in this movie. I think, so the last Pixar movie was Coco, and that left me an emotional wreck, and that was a big deal and more an adult movie. And I think that this movie's fine. I wish that it had more, I don't want to keep saying emotion, but that's what I look for in these Pixar movies, and it was kind of missing here. But overall, I thought it was a lot of fun. I think that it's as good as any superhero movie that comes out now, and I enjoyed seeing where the Parr family went after the first Incredibles. So I don't know. I have other stuff I'll say for story, but obviously, for the most part, I was pretty happy with the movie.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up Brad Bird because I feel completely different. I don't think that I like his storytelling. So there are several movies that he's wrote and directed. I have them listed here. Of course, he did the Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which is a really good movie, but he didn't write that movie. So the movies that he has written and directed are as follows: Iron Giant, Incredibles, Rat-Tatouille, Tomorrowland, and of course this movie, Incredibles 2. And I'm pretty lukewarm on all of those movies. I had just recently watched Iron Giant for the first time. I know that's kind of embarrassing for an animated fan, but I just never got around to it. And I don't get why everybody loves that movie. It's okay. Like I said, I'm lukewarm on pretty much all of them. I just don't think that I like his style of storytelling, I guess, because it has to, at some point, it's what's the common denominator? It's him. So I just don't think that I appreciate his style of storytelling. And a lot of my problems have a lot to do with the stories. And I obviously won't spoil anything that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So I'll save it for the actual story part of this discussion. I don't think that Mr. Incredible is a great character. I don't think that he is a likable character, and I'll get into why I don't think that here in a second. And this is a movie that these types of movies I generally struggle to review because it's easy to really kill and shit on a bad movie, and it's really easy to praise a movie that we loved. But it's hard for me to verbally shrug my shoulders. I felt like I I knew I was watching a decent movie. Like, as far as the animation, like you mentioned, it does look beautiful. I think it's a little over the top at sometimes. Like, there's so much going on at certain points in this movie that, I mean, that's not the animation's fault, obviously, but it was a little overwhelming at times. But, so, I mean, it was well put together. There wasn't anything like major plot holes or anything like that. It was just a little thing here and there that I just didn't really connect with. And I wouldn't say that I was necessarily bored during this movie by any means. It was just like, I think it goes back to just not connecting with the first movie at all. So I just don't have that emotional attachment. And you mentioned that you wish it was a little bit more emotional, and you do have that attachment. So you can just imagine how I felt watching this movie.
Cool. You ready to get into the story?
For sure.
So for me, I think that the story was serviceable. Like, it makes sense from a standpoint of picking up where the first one leaves off. And I like that, you know, they made the choice to show, it kind of flips the first one on its head a little bit. Like, this one is about Elastigirl out doing her thing and Mr. Incredible stuck at home raising the kids. And I think that there are some genuinely funny parts to this movie. There were quite a few times where I laughed out loud, which is always a good thing whenever you're seeing a movie made for kids. So I thought that the stuff with Jack was really great and really cute. And of course, Edna makes an appearance, and I really liked her part in the movie as well. I think the biggest complaint I have, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that you had an issue with as well, is that they make a big deal about the villain in this movie. And it's pretty obvious from the beginning who the villain is. So it's like they're trying to make it I don't know if it was necessarily meant to be a big twist, but if you've ever seen a movie in your life, it's pretty obvious who the bad guy is as soon as the character is introduced in the film. So that was disappointing to me because I think that they could have maybe done something a little different there. But my other problem with the movie is obviously what I said in broad strokes. I really wish that they had really concentrated on the emotion of the family dynamic in this film a little bit more. It was more so just every character kind of had their issues, and it kind of dealt with how Mr. Incredible was helping his kids, and there's not really much emotional weight there, which I had a problem with. I think that there's definitely some other stuff that you could have done, and I think in the first Incredibles, they do it a lot better because it comes to grips with the kids finding their powers and trying to hide them, but then having to step up and save their parents and help to save their dad, and that's just not here in this movie. So, you know, I don't care about Violet's date, and I don't care about Dash's math homework. So that stuff just didn't hit for me. There was one point in the movie where, you know, some superheroes come out of hiding, and, you know, she's telling Elastigirl how this superhero named Void is telling Elastigirl about how happy she is to be able to be who she is and this and that. And I thought, I kind of perked up a little bit, like, okay, here we go. This is the emotional weight of the movie that I'm looking for, but it's almost a throwaway line and it's never revisited again. So that left me underwhelmed, but overall, I think that it's a really fun superhero movie. I think it's a really fun action movie. There are some parts that I'll talk about when we get into the action aspect that I think were very well animated, but yeah, overall, I was just looking for a little bit more weight.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up the villain in this movie because that is definitely something that bothered me quite a lot in this movie. But the more I thought about it, I mean, you do kind of have to grade on a curve with an animated movie because we've talked about this a lot. I mean, Pixar does try to aim a little bit higher than some studios as far as their animation is concerned. They try to make more adult animated movies than most studios do. So you do kind of grade them a little bit different, but at the same time, ultimately these movies are for kids and you have to grade on a curve when it comes to an animated movie. Of course, these filmmakers must know that it's fairly obvious who the villain is, but it might not be fairly obvious to a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old. So I, like you, knew who the villain was the first fucking time you see he or she in the movie. So I was like, okay, that person's gonna ultimately be the bad guy, and it just felt weird trying. to watch them try to go through the beats of like trying to set us up for something that we know is ultimately going to happen if you've seen any movie in your entire life. So that was definitely disappointing. But the thing that I kind of teased a little bit in broad strokes is I just don't think that Mr. Incredible is that likable of a character, and especially the first movie hinges on him and not so much the second movie, because that's much more of Elastigirl's story, and he's kind of like the B story of the movie for the most part. But the thing that really bothered me during this movie is the fact that in the first movie, so he's kind of a D-bag in the first movie. Like, he doesn't appreciate his family. He wants to go back to fighting bad guys and stuff and reliving the glory days. And he has this big moment in the first movie, and it's really the kind of the big emotional punch of that movie is where he thinks that his family has died in a plane crash. And then he finds out that they aren't dead, and he's like, he shows this appreciation, and he has this epiphany, and it's the biggest emotional moment of this movie. And then in the second movie is supposed to happen moments after the first movie, and it happens, and then there's a couple of weeks that go by, and then all of a sudden he finds out that they're starting this program, and he doesn't get picked to spearhead it. And he's basically bitter and jealous that his wife gets to go on all these adventures, and he has to stay home and get stuck with the kids. Literally weeks after he had this, what they kind of paint this picture that this is a life-changing epiphany in the first movie, and then he's just back to being a D-bag because he didn't get picked. And so I just don't think that he's a very likable character. And I think, kind of going back to what you said about starting the movie, like basically picking up where they left off, was a mistake if you were going to tell that story, because it just, that big moment in the first movie, now looking back, doesn't hit as hard now that I know he's just going to go right back to being a D-bag. And another problem I had was the fact that you don't really have that punch in this movie like you do in the first movie. I don't know if necessarily knowing that he just goes back to being a D-bag, I don't know if I necessarily believe it if we did have it, but it was just kind of disappointing that, like you said, just didn't have that emotional hit in this movie that we did the first one. And I guess it doesn't really matter in the long run, like I just said. But yeah, I will say that as far as the villain, I failed to mention this a little bit earlier. It does kind of, once you realize who the villain is, it does kind of follow the same beats as the first villain from the first movie. And so that was kind of disappointing. So, just kind of throw that in real quick. But that's pretty much all I have for the story.
Cool. So, I mean, performances wise, I think that there's not much to say there. I think, like, on my end at least, all the voice acting was really good. I think that the people that do the voices of the family, so Holly Hunter and Craig Nelson, and then the kids, of course, are all fine. I mean, Samuel L. Jackson has an amazing voice, and I love him as Frozone. That was Bob Odenkirk in this movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's fine. I just, it's really hard to pick apart voice acting performances. I'm not saying that there's not an art to being a voice actor. I think that there absolutely is. But in most cases, I think that they also get what they need for the film. And in this movie, they get what they need. Like, I have no complaints performance-wise.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say, and this is not anything against her performance, it's just her voice in general annoys me. Yeah, I just don't really like, what's her name? Holly Hunter?
Yeah.
Yeah, her voice to me is just super annoying. And so I wasn't a fan of that. But other than that, they all did a good job.
For sure.
I will say real quick that the voice of his sister, it bothered me the entire movie, and it just reminded me that I had never looked it up. It's Catherine Keener, who is Steve Carell's girlfriend in 40-Year-Old Virgin. And like the entire movie, I couldn't fucking think of her. Like, I couldn't put a face to the voice. And we've talked a little bit about that in the past, that kind of takes us a little out of the movie. But that was just my mind that I couldn't put it to rest until I figured it out. So I just had to look it up.
Gotcha. You ready to move on to, I guess, animation / action, whatever we want to do there?
For sure.
So, I mean, I said it in my broad strokes. The animation is amazing. I mean, you would expect no less at this point from an animated movie, especially when it's Pixar, because they're kind of, in my mind, the gold standard. So it lives up here. As far as the action goes, I think that, like, there were parts of this movie where I was really getting into the action. There's a part where Elastigirl is on a motorcycle and she's chasing a monorail, and the motorcycle splits in half and she uses her body almost as like a rubber band. I thought that was genius. I really enjoyed that scene. I like all of the things that they do with her ability in particular, because there's a lot of creativity you can do with her power there. The stuff with Jack, I think, was really well animated as too. Like, obviously he has a lot of powers and he does a lot of different things, and I thought all of that was really well done. There's action on a boat at the end of the movie, and I won't spoil too much, but I thought that was great as well. There's some stuff that one of the superheroes has that almost reminds me of Portal, which is probably where they got the idea, but they did some cool stuff there. And I think that when you think about the intricacy of the animation of something like that, it's pretty impressive. So, I mean, I have nothing but great things to say about both the animation and the action.
For sure. It's a Pixar movie, so it is obviously going to be well animated. Like I said a little bit earlier, I do think that it was a little too much at times. Some of the action was a little much for me in an animated movie. Not that it was like super hardcore or anything like that. It was just like they were throwing a lot at you at one time. And I have seen a few things going around the interwebs that, like, if people have like the tendency to have like epileptic seizures and stuff like that people have said not to go see this movie, or just at least be aware of it. So there's a thing. So it wasn't just me. But I will say that I completely agree with you about the motorcycle thing. That was really, really cool. I actually think that they could have done more with the motorcycle. Like, at one point, the motorcycle explodes and they never really get another one. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. But yeah, I definitely like her ability, and I think that's kind of a fun thing that I wonder if they regret giving Violet shitty powers. Like, I mean, she does have the force field, so that's cool. Like, it does come in handy a lot during some of the fight scenes, but, like, she doesn't really get to do a whole lot. And so I wonder if they kind of regret some of the powers that they've given him. And I wonder if that had played a little bit with Jack, because they basically gave him everything. And the other kids, like, I mean, Dash, obviously, he's super fast, and that comes in handy for sure. But I just feel like they gave the mom such a weird power, and then they gave her daughter, I don't know why I had to think of the word for daughter, such kind of like a shitty power. Like, I think they were kind of going for Invisible Woman, because those are very similar powers to the Invisible Woman. So obviously that was probably a play on that, but she doesn't seem like she'd be that handy in a fight.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's it, right? That was a pretty short review.
Yeah, I think that we probably felt the pressure a little bit with how long we went getting up to the review. But yeah, I'm going to give it 4 stars. What are you going to give it?
I think that I'll probably give it 3. Like, it's not a bad movie, but like I said, I just never connected with it and really got into it. I think I actually connected more to the animated short than I did to any point in this movie.
That animated short, like, it came together in the end, and I'm glad you brought that up. I thought we would probably talk about it a little bit. It came together in the end, obviously, and I kind of felt like that's what it was leading up to, but it was also kind of fucking weird.
It was very fucking weird.
Like, when, I don't want to spoil it, but at the point where she eats the dumpling, it was like, what the fuck? So it was strange, but I mean, it all comes together in the end, and as usual, it was really well done.
Yeah, for sure.
So, okay, you ready to move on to Nerd Favorite?
Yeah, so you've already said what it is.
Yeah, I did. So, if you've fast forwarded to this point, just as a reminder, it's what your favorite thing from E3 was. So, mine was the Resident Evil 2 trailer, the redo, the remix, whatever you want to call it, that they're doing of that. I always wanted to play that game after I played Resident Evil 4. I've said it multiple times, Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I remember researching and seeing that Leon Scott Kennedy's first appearance was in Resident Evil 2, so I always wanted to go back and play that game and just never got around to it. So I'm pretty pumped that they are redoing it for current gen consoles, so I'm definitely excited for that. The trailer looked gorgeous. Leon Scott Kennedy is one of my favorite video game characters of all time, and I'm excited to play as him again. So yeah, that was my favorite.
So it's kind of weird because I haven't had a PlayStation 4 for too long, and so I think it's kind of weird that we both picked something from the Sony presentation, considering the both of us are big Xbox guys. I was obviously excited for Halo Infinite, but they didn't give us any real gameplay. It was just kind of a short gameplay trailer, or not even a gameplay trailer, just a short cinematic trailer. So yeah, I was excited for that, but the thing that really blew me away, and I want to go with the Last of Us Part 2, but I knew I was getting that. The thing that really blew me away, that I had no idea this game even existed, and it just really caught me off guard and by surprise, is the Ghosts of Tsushima, which there's no fucking way that I pronounced that correctly. That game looks amazing. It looks like Ninja Gaiden, but with samurais, and I just think that's really cool. I love Ninja Gaiden. The first one for Xbox is like one of the hardest games I've ever played, and it's just fantastically well put together in that game. Every time I was like, the whole time I was watching that trailer, I was like, man, that looks like Ninja Gaiden, and I can't wait to play this game.
Yeah, I didn't catch that trailer, so I'll have to look it up. Sounds fun.
Yeah, for sure. So that is it for, I believe this is episode 194. I might be off a little bit because any PopCon episode always screws me up. But I hope that you enjoyed it as always. Subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use, we're on it. Check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. You can also comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. Email us at thenerdsyou'relooking@gmail.com. And, of course, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.